So I was scrolling through the usual diplomatic feeds the other day, expecting the standard dry language of international relations.
Right. Vague warnings, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Red lines or grave concerns. But then I saw something that it stopped me cold. It was a post from a Chinese diplomat stationed in Japan.
Okay.
And it wasn't a policy critique. It wasn't about a trade dispute. It was this visceral, really violent call to actually behead the Japanese Prime Minister, Sane Takaichi.
Wow.
For a moment, it honestly felt like a glitch. I mean, this was the whole veneer of modern diplomacy completely shattering. But just as the shock settled in, the narrative took this sharp, silent turn.
The post was deleted.
Instantly gone. The diplomat, or, maybe his superiors, realized the mask had slipped too far, but the damage was already done.
Of course.
And look, that one deleted tweet, it wasn't just some isolated outburst. It was the tip of a much, much larger iceberg. It mirrored exactly what is happening on the ground right now. We aren't just seeing angry words anymore. We are seeing a sudden, coordinated shift from iron will to what Chinese state media is now calling a flood of steel. From warships circling disputed islands to the quiet weaponization of tourism and rare earths, the strategy has shifted from negotiation to pure shock and awe. It leaves you wondering, is this the confidence of a superpower flexing its muscles, or is this a sign that Beijing is actually losing its cool?
It's a crucial question. And, this escalation is tied directly to a massive, really fundamental shift happening inside Japan. A shift that China views as, an existential threat to the regional status quo.
Right.
To understand the reaction, you have to understand the catalyst, and that is Prime Minister Sane Takaichi.
Takaichi is absolutely the hinge upon which this current crisis turns. She's labeled in Chinese state media as an extreme right-wing politician. They often call her the female Abe.
Signaling the continuation of Shinzo Abe's vision for military expansion and revisionist history.
Exactly. But her personal history is fascinating because she doesn't really fit the mold. She's not from a prominent political family, which is pretty rare for a top LDP leader. She earned a reputation for being fiercely defiant, even rebellious. I think you mentioned she was an avid heavy metal drummer in her youth.
That rebellious streak, it informs her current political style of confrontation. It's a key part of her appeal. But the real ideological forging, that happened during her training. She's a graduate of the Matsushita Institute of Government and Management, or MIGM.
MIGM, right, founded by the head of Panasonic. It sounds like a place designed to cultivate a very specific kind of leadership.
That's it exactly. Yeah. The Institute promotes a curriculum dedicated to instilling national pride and sharply criticizing what they call the post-war masochistic view of history.
The idea that Japan has been too apologetic?
Precisely. This view, in their opinion, crippled Japan's ability to act confidently on the world stage and forced it into the restrictive pacifism of Article 9. For Takaichi, graduating from there was an ideological commitment to fundamentally reversing that historical outlook, making her the perfect agent for this policy pivot.
And that pivot leads directly to the core provocative remark that triggered this whole crisis. Her statement that a Chinese attempt to blockade or seize Taiwan could constitute a threat to Japan's survival. For you listening, this isn't just rhetoric. This is a legal and constitutional tripwire.
It is the legal argument they needed. Japan's defense posture is rooted in exclusively defensive defense, mandated by its constitution. However, Takaichi's interpretation provides the justification, the legal gymnastics, as you put it, to introduce counter-strike capability officially into their defense doctrine.
Okay, let's unpack that. When we talk about counter-strike capability, it sounds like Japan is moving away from purely passive defense and towards something more like preemptive, or at least retaliatory, force projection. But how do they justify that without completely scrapping the Constitution?
They look backward to a very specific, very narrow legal interpretation from 1956. The government view from that year allowed for striking enemy-guided missile bases if, and this is the key part, if there were no other defensive means available to stop an attack.
So the right was technically always there.
The legal right was yes, but acquiring the actual long-range missiles and infrastructure was intentionally avoided as a policy decision. It was just seen as too aggressive. The reversal isn't in the legal theory, it's in the policy choice to dedicate billions to acquiring that capability right now. That's the fundamental change.
And we see that change materialized in the massive national security overhaul underway. This isn't just shifting a few lines of legal text. This is a comprehensive multi-billion-dollar defense reinforcement plan. It's aimed squarely at enhancing warfighting readiness.
This is a total reset. They're committing to a defense budget increase that will see them spending 2% of GDP on defense by 2027. That's a target that was previously considered unthinkable.
Which makes Japan one of the largest defense spenders in the world.
Globally, yes. The goal is to enhance deterrence across 7 critical operational areas.
And 2 of those areas really stand out as modernizing capabilities beyond just conventional means.
Absolutely. The first is developing standoff strike capabilities, meaning long-range anti-ship and land attack missiles that can hit targets hundreds of miles away. It's about preventing a direct invasion from ever reaching the main islands.
And the second one?
The second, and arguably more future-proof, is the focus on cross-domain operations, or what the Japanese security community terms USADA.
USADA. Space, cyber, and the electromagnetic spectrum. What are they building in those domains that signals this shift in deterrence?
They're essentially building the eyes and the nervous system of modern warfare. In the cyber realm, they're moving from a defensive shield to developing offensive capabilities to neutralize incoming attacks.
So not just blocking, but punching back.
Exactly. In space, it's about robust satellite communications and surveillance to maintain awareness, especially around the Taiwan Strait. The electromagnetic domain is crucial for jamming enemy communications and missile guidance. These cross-domain capabilities are what enable the counterstrike policy. Without them, the long-range missiles are blind and defenseless. By 2027, Japan aims to take the primary responsibility for dealing with invasions in its vicinity, fundamentally changing the regional power equation.
When you lay out the technical shift, the budget change, it shows that the geopolitical fault line has moved right up to Japan's westernmost border. And that's where the human cost becomes, well, starkly visible.
Yeah, the focus narrows to places like Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost inhabited island. For the roughly 1,700 residents there, this military buildup is not abstract at all.
They're living it.
They're living under constant pressure. Local life has been fundamentally disrupted by the frequent sightings of Chinese naval vessels patrolling nearby waters, often within visual range.
And the installation of new military radar and defense units, that must change the character of the community itself.
It does. While the central government views this as necessary protection, the local populace harbors this distinct sense of unease. Reports indicate they feel like they are the bait in this strategic game.
That they're the most expendable piece on the board.
Right, constantly under the gaze of a potential adversary. This tension between the national need for defense and the profound disruption of individual peace, that is the real cost of reinterpreting Article 9.
That human element makes the diplomatic rhetoric we discussed earlier even more chilling. Moving back to Beijing, that visceral call for the prime minister's beheading, even if it was deleted, showcases a diplomatic strategy based on outright intimidation. We're seeing wolf warrior diplomacy in its purest, most aggressive form.
And that aggressive form has a specific message. Chinese state media isn't talking about resolve anymore. They are moving past the concept of iron will. They are asserting that China now possesses a flood of steel in its military buildup.
A statement of overwhelming material capacity.
Exactly. It's designed to shock and terrify Japan into policy concessions. The core tactic is to assert China's non-negotiable status as a superpower and make Japanese leaders fear the consequences of their rhetoric.
And this aggressive confidence is backed up by economic coercion, which is often far more immediate and, frankly, more painful than military posturing. China is weaponizing its massive consumer base and its role in global supply chains.
The financial consequences for Japan were immediate and massive. Think about tourism. Following diplomatic disputes and travel warnings, a Tokyo-based tour operator specializing in Chinese clients reported losing 80% of its bookings within days.
80%? That's your business wiped out overnight just based on a diplomatic spat.
It is. And that level of volatility must send shivers through the entire Japanese service industry.
Of course.
It does. Analysts estimate the potential annual loss to the Japanese economy from this tourism boycott alone is around 2.2 trillion yen, which converts to over $14 billion annually.
That's not a negligible number.
Not at all. That's the equivalent of months of national spending on education or infrastructure that is simply vanishing. But the coercion doesn't stop with travel.
What other economic levers are proving effective for Beijing?
They have used cultural and educational levers. Things like the postponement of screenings of popular Japanese films in China, issuing safety warnings to Chinese students and tourists, creating a climate of fear. However, the most potent threat is the recurring warning from hardline analysts: halting rare earth exports.
Right. Rare earths are crucial for high-tech manufacturing globally, but especially for Japan's automotive and electronics sectors.
Exactly. China controls a massive portion of the world's rare earth supply. They've previously used this as a punitive trade measure, and the global alarm it sparked demonstrated just how effective weaponizing essential raw materials can be.
So using rare earths as leverage signals that China is willing to deploy tools that impact not just Japan, but the entire global supply chain.
It demonstrates a willingness to prioritize political goals over economic stability, yes.
That aggressive, unvarnished approach must be generating some international blowback, right? Coercion usually comes with a reputational cost.
It absolutely does. Japan issued an official condemnation of the bullying tactics and warned its citizens in China to step up safety precautions. They condemned the routine Chinese naval maneuvers near disputed islands as violating international law and unacceptable.
So it pushes other countries away.
Well, what Beijing often miscalculates in its pursuit of shocking its rivals is that this aggressive response draws wider international attention to its hardline practices. It fuels the narrative that China is a disruptive force, which in turn pushes nations like the U.S. and its allies closer together.
Let's pivot from these immediate tactical actions to the deep roots of the conflict, because the friction is clearly inflamed by leaders like Takaichi, but the fuel source is historical grievance.
That history is the lifeblood of this political fire. Takaichi consistently fuels it through her association with the ultra-conservative Nippon Kaigi.
And their core mission is what, exactly?
It's not just political reform. They specifically advocate for a full revision of Article 9 and a complete reinterpretation of Japan's wartime history.
And her most notorious public acts cement that image, particularly her repeated, high-profile visits to the Yasukuni Shrine.
That shrine visit is a deliberate, highly visible provocation. It's where class of war criminals from World War II are enshrined. Every time she visits, she reinforces her anti-China image and signals her revisionist agenda to her base and to her neighbors.
And it's consistent with her past statements.
Very. Her past comments are equally provocative. In the 1990s, she sharply questioned the former prime minister for apologizing for the war of aggression. This is not just historical debate. This is political positioning using historical denial.
So Takaichi uses historical revisionism to appeal to a nationalist base in Japan. But how does Beijing weaponize those same historical grievances? How does that history serve the Communist Party today?
For Beijing, it is fundamentally about political legitimacy. After the death of Mao, the CCP faced immense domestic difficulties, social instability, backlash against economic reforms, a lack of ideological unity. They needed a new source of authority.
And that source became aggressive nationalism, framing the CCP as the ultimate defender of the nation.
Precisely. Starting in the 1980s, they aggressively shifted their focus, moving away from class struggle toward patriotic education. They recast the memory of the war, which they had previously downplayed in the 70s, to foster cooperation against the USSR and the US into a narrative of national victimhood.
So they position Japan as the eternally immoral other.
And position the Communist Party as the sole, indispensable guardian of national pride who avenges past injustices.
That must create a vicious feedback loop between the government and the public.
It does. This elite myth-making has led to the radicalization of popular opinion, particularly online, giving rise to what is known as the thanking culture, the indignant young people. These internet users vocally demand hardline anti-Japanese policies.
And if a Chinese leader appears to favor compromise or de-escalation, they risk being labeled a traitor by this influential nationalist element.
That is the uncritical domestic constraint. This popular rage ties the hands of Chinese leaders who might otherwise pursue pragmatic foreign policy or compromise. The historical narrative, initially weaponized by the party to shore up its own legitimacy, now dictates the bounds of its foreign policy, forcing continued aggression even when it is strategically counterproductive internationally. So if we synthesize this, we are watching a dual predicament play out in real time. China's increasingly aggressive stance, the economic coercion, the flood of steel rhetoric, it's all driven by a deep, domestic need for political legitimacy rooted in historical narratives of victimhood and pride.
But the paradox is so clear. This very aggression is having the inverse effect. It is actively pushing Japan toward the exact militaristic future that China fears. It provides the justification needed for massive defense spending and the abandonment of the post-war pacifist policy.
It is a profound, self-fulfilling prophecy of confrontation. And the most profound effect of China's wolf warrior approach is not the short-term economic damage it manages to inflict, but its long-term success in unifying the political will and justifying massive defense spending in rival nations that previously resisted military assertiveness. The act of intimidating a rival with overwhelming force often creates a resilient and determined adversary where only ambiguity once existed, ultimately strengthening the defensive alliances it intended to shatter.